Hi everyone, and welcome to the first episode of The Grateful Gardener with me, your host, Sam Bittman. And we're coming to you today from the beautiful Berkshire Mountains of Western Massachusetts. Today we launch a new episode about growing food, veggies, herbs, fruit, exclusively in raised gardens. So stick around, we got a lot of interesting stuff to do. So why raised beds and why am I so grateful? Well, first thing is that I've just turned 80, entering my 9th decade of circling the sun, and I'm still vertical and healthy. Also, because almost nothing gives me as much pleasure as gardening, I get to continue to do it again. Only this time, because of tetchy knees and a back that kvetches when it bends too much, I'm turning to raised beds. Over the years as a landscaper and a gardener, I've created many large flower pots and containers for my customers' porches and patios. But I never really grew anything in a constructed raised bed. So I thought if I built a raised bed, and especially hip high, it would go easier on the old guy. Sort of put my use-by date as far forward as possible. I'm also very grateful for whatever comes to life in me whenever I'm around plants and trees and insects in the ground and worms crawling through and insects flying through the air. It's just very special for me. It's the serenity, it's the peace of mind that I'm looking for when I move plants around the garden and water them and feed them and mulch them and all of that. That's what I'm really looking forward to or looking for. And for me, I get that fairly regularly, and that's also to be grateful for. There is labor in raised bed gardening, only it's not the back-breaking kind of digging ground, turning soil. No, but you've got to build this structure, which you can do alone or with help. I had help. Then there's the soil medium that has to be researched and decided upon. And I had a lot of help with that from Dick and Crane over at Holiday Brook Farm. And I'll show you about that in a minute. I apologize in advance for not having filmed the construction of this bed last fall. But if you go to Google or YouTube and search raised bed garden designs, you'll find a ton of videos and a ton of wonderful DIY instructions and illustrations. The total planting area is 112 square feet, which I know to ground gardeners doesn't sound like a whole lot of ground. But I'm willing to bet we're going to take a ton of stuff, produce, edible stuff out of here over the course of the season. Now, the depth here originally was 2.5 feet deep. And we're going to talk about filling that in just a moment. I want to talk with you about a very simple process to build up our soil base that's based upon a centuries-old agrarian practice in Germany and Eastern Europe called Hügelkultur, or hill culture. Now, I apologize again because last fall I filled the first 2 feet of the bed and didn't film it. But I'm going to show you in a second how it actually works. In Hügelkultur practice, the idea is to excavate a shallow pit at the bottom, then load in logs and brush, old lumber and firewood, then old plant trimmings, then a mix of leaves and half-completed compost goes into the heap. And when that's done, the farmer would add the final layer, a mix of finished compost and garden soil. And in that, they'd plant vegetables, berries, herbs, and even fruit trees. As the material at the bottom of the mound breaks down over time, it becomes a moisture-retaining reservoir for when things up top become dry, and a source of nutrients for plant roots reaching down. And now we're faced with one more chore here, almost one more, and that's to fill the top 10 or 12 inches with a really fine growing medium. Back in the 70s, there's an engineer named Mel Bartholomew who developed an intensive growing practice called square foot gardening. And he used a very special medium for growing his plants. And it's forever been called since then Mel's Mix. And it consists of 1/3 compost, 1/3 peat moss, and 1/3 vermiculite. And I had a great deal of help mixing that up at Dick and Crane's Holiday Brook Farm, and let me just show you how that went. We cut open some bags of peat moss, then bags of vermiculite, and finally toted over a bag that contained nearly a yard and a half of compost. We mixed it, or those guys mixed it, with a bucket loader, and then loaded it into his big mixer, where it tippled off into the back of a waiting dump truck. After that, it was delivered right here. So I need about 4 yards of this beautiful mix to fill the top 12 inches of the planting bed here. And I ordered 5 yards because I want another yard to fill grow bags, which, by the way, we will talk about in our next video. So let me get started because it's going to take me a while. Well, there we have it. Looks great, doesn't it? It's beautiful. Took a lot of work, and everybody on the crew was involved. 2 things left to do with this before we plant, which is at the next video. First is to hydrate it. This is a pretty dry mix, and we want to get it to the right soil temperature, so I'm going to shower down on this baby. Let it soak in. You know, this is a dry mix, so it's also very water retentive, because it's got the peat moss in it, which holds a ton of water. Compost itself holds water, and the vermiculite holds water. Plus it gives some air to the soil. Anyway, we'll work this in and see if it gets to be just right. Okay, so it's looking pretty great. It's not entirely soaked the way I want it to, but I put my moisture meter in and it registers mid-level moist, and that's good for now because I'm going to water some more later once I've put some soil amendments on, which is what we're doing next. Okay, so there's one thing more to do with this topsoil. There's an expression in gardening that says the eye of the gardener fattens the land. And what that means to me is that the gardener's eye is curious, it's scrutinizing, it discovers opportunities, it takes risks, and it also looks to create some insurance. And that's what I'm going to do today by adding 3 favorite soil amendments that do a great job. The first one is worm castings, about which I can't say enough. It has as much nitrogen as compost, and sometimes, depending upon the particular harvest of worm castings, it'll have even the same amount of potassium and phosphorus as compost. This stuff is actually teeming with worm eggs, which are going to hatch out when the weather gets a little warmer, and we're going to have worms in the soil. And that, my friends, is leading me to a project we're going to do later in the season. So I'm going to show you how to build your own successful little worm farm. And that is going to be a fun thing to have. So it turns out 30 million years ago, there was an ocean in Utah. And it had a lot of volcanic activity, and that lava turned into mixed with seawater, and when the sea receded, there was left this natural deposit of stuff which is literally contains almost all the elements that soil life needs. And it's marketed as azomite, A-Z-O-M-I-T-E, and what it stands for is A to Z minerals in trace elements. What you want to do, it takes very little as an application, and what you want to do is get this micronized stuff, which is, it's fine as powder, and it is immediately accessible to plants. And again, it doesn't take very much. You can never overdo it because it won't burn roots. And it's a fabulous soil conditioner, they say, for every soil. There's one more product I want to add to the soil. I use it as a top dressing. It's a standard slow release organic plant material, plant fertilizer, excuse me. And I'm going to just put a dusting on this. Now this takes a while, not that long, but a while to start breaking down and for these nutrients to become available to plants' roots. Now I'm just going to take this handy little tool that reaches all the way across, and I'm going to scratch it into all three amendments into the top 2 or 3 inches of soil. And we're going to do that all the way around. And then when we're done, we're going to have a beautiful planting bed. Well, there we have it. Looks great, doesn't it? It's beautiful. Took a lot of work, and everybody on the crew was involved. 2 things left to do with this before we plant, which is at the next video. First is to hydrate it. This is a pretty dry mix, and we want to get it to the right soil temperature, so I'm going to shower down on this baby. You know, this is a dry mix, so it's also very water retentive, because it's got the peat moss in it, which holds a ton of water. Compost itself holds water, and the vermiculite holds water. Plus it gives some air to the soil. So we've got the soil mix all together, and we're ready to go. Our next video is going to be about making a planting grid and actually planting this baby and letting the magic happen. If by any chance you found something today of interest in our video, please subscribe to us. There's a click button down below, and you can also give us a thumbs up. Until next time, this is The Grateful Gardener wishing you a great week.